This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of our investment group, and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate enough to have a distinguished guest who have had a distinguished career in foreign service. Now he's giving back to the community in India. His name is Ambassador Dasgupta. Ambassador, nice to see you, and thank you very much for coming over here. Please tell us a little bit about your background for our audience. Before I get started, as you know, now that you retired from the Foreign Service and now you are the head of the SP Jain School of Management and you're giving back, as you know, that I've given several $1 million, my wife Debbie, and she's an American, Frank and Debbie Islam Management Complex at Aligarh Muslim University. So when I'm there, I would like to invite you to come over there. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
I joined the Foreign Service in 1979 and have been an Indian diplomat for several years. It's been a great honor and a pleasure to serve India in that capacity. And after I retired, a couple of years later, I joined the SP Jain School of Global Management and headed their Mumbai campus, which I
Oh, okay.
was the inaugural. And thereafter, when I felt that I had done what I tasked myself to do, I resigned from the SP Jain and was very fortunate to be offered a job as the India head for the internationally ranked University of New South Wales, which is
Oh,
in Sydney.
wonderful.
So I'm the inaugural India head for UNSW Sydney. Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's a fantastic challenge, and I'm enjoying myself thoroughly.
So you're talking to us from Australia right now?
No, no, I'm talking to you from India because the India office is located in New Delhi.
Oh, wonderful. We'll talk a little bit about your engagement and what you're doing over there in a minute. So let's start the question with regard to the fact that the do you think that the Indian Foreign Service is better or is more capable than the other foreign services? Do you think the IFS officer have the knowledge and experience uh, to understand the international matters?
No, I would not say that we are better or worse than anyone. I'd start off by saying that one of the great things about the Indian Foreign Service, which is a plus and a minus, is that we are among the smallest foreign services in the world,
Yes,
given the
yes.
fact that we are spread over 150 different offices across the globe. And so that impacted the manner in which we professionally engaged. All of us did everything. So we learned how to multitask. And I think that has been a great stay of the Indian Foreign Service. Is that a good thing? I think it's important to expand our diplomatic cadre, and so that we can put more boots on the ground, so to speak, have more personnel to be able to engage in a more specialized and technical manner. But it's been a great honor to serve the Indian Foreign Service, and I look back with fantastic memories, great friendships across the globe.
So when you look back the time you spent with them, you still cherish those memory and the miles you have traveled with them, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, if I was to
So
live
if
again, yeah, I would do exactly what I did.
oh, wonderful. If you have the opportunity to do so, do you think that the diplomacy is a craft, is an art, or is it a science? Is it both?
I think it's a bit of both. But I think what's going to happen is that a new diplomacy is taking shape. The diplomacy that we grew up with was Westphalian to a large extent. Diplomats actually laid the ground for meetings between heads of state and government. But I think the new diplomacy is where heads of state and government directly engage with one another, and
Correct.
sometimes the diplomats are involved. And So I think there's a new diplomacy that is coming to being, and it's important for all diplomats across the globe, if they want to be useful, to actually reimagine what their job is and how they can take conversations that presidents and prime ministers have with each other, how they can take that forward, because it's turned 180 degrees. So the whole role has to be reimagined. So I think it's a great time for diplomacy globally.
Mr. Ambassador, as you mentioned a minute ago that you are a chair, I will talk a little bit about that in Australia, Sydney. You are viewed as an expert in Australia. So my question to you is, how important are the Australia's ties with India? And I also want to talk a little bit about the role of the Indian diaspora in Australia. What role do they play? Do they have the character, the capacity, and responsibility, and the competence to make a difference?
I think they're two very, very important questions, but let me start with the diaspora. I have always believed that the Indian diaspora, I mean, any country's diaspora, is actually the genuine ambassadors of that country. How they behave, what they do, who they engage with. It is common people who interact with them, and that's how perceptions about countries are actually made. So
Very well said.
if your neighbor is Indian and you deal with the person and you find the person engaging, you tend to think that India is engaging. But if you have a negative perception about the person, then you tend to dismiss an entire country and an entire people on the basis of personal experiences. So I think the diaspora is extremely important, and it is also critical that diplomatic services across the globe engage very meaningfully and very substantively with the diaspora. And I think this is happening now across the globe.
Yes.
Different countries are doing so. And many in the diaspora, whether it's the Israeli diaspora, or the Pakistani diaspora, or the Indian diaspora, or the Chinese, they are doing great work. And in Australia, for example, many of the Indians or persons of Indian origin are members of parliament. They've gone
Oh,
into the legislative assembly. They are professionals as doctors, as engineers, as teachers, as university faculty members. So I think the diaspora in Australia is surely a community that I was very, very happy to engage with without any doubts. And I think that
well,
will only
I
grow.
am I'm Indian diaspora in the United States, lived here all my life. I embody the American dream. I totally agree that the Indian diaspora has the capacity uh, to 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 make sure that the India is reflected in a very positive manner. And we have 3 or 4 members of the Congress in the House who are Indian origins. So you're absolutely right. It is a responsibility of the government of India to engage them, to involve them, and to have people-to-people dialogue and engagement. So I totally agree with that. What I wanted to
Let
talk a
me,
little bit about. Go ahead,
Frank,
Mr.
let me add
Ambassador.
to that. When you look at the historic 123 agreement that was signed between India
Yes,
and the United States, President
correct.
Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh publicly acknowledged the terrific role that was played by the Indian diaspora.
And I was
So
one
it's
of
the
them.
Indian diaspora. Yeah, I mean, the Indian diaspora is not just there symbolically. They made a substantive and a very significant impact on the U.S. government, and I think credit is owed to them, and in a very richly deserved manner. So I have terrific respect for the diaspora.
Uh, uh, you're absolutely right, and thank you very much for that. I want to talk a little bit about this. You have been appointed as they call them Indian County Director of UNSW's Sydney. Why would Australia open a separate India office in New Delhi? What's the purpose of that, and what are they trying to accomplish? And how do you think they will be able to take the relationship between India and Australia to the next height?
Well, I think, I mean, UNSW had a very strong policy built over many, many years, almost 15 years with the Chinese. And so you had a strong China engagement that the Australians had, that UNSW had. And now that that relationship has taken root and is a stable, strong partnership, they are now looking at how they can expand. And India was the obvious choice. And so UNSW has an India engagement strategy. And I believe that collaboration in higher education is going to become a foreign policy instrument in the bilateral relationship. And this kind of collaboration is not just getting Indian students into Australia, it's also participating in research projects which have a development impact, whether it's on photovoltaics or on cancer research, on waste management, on smart transport, on cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. These are all areas in which UNSW, as a QS internationally ranked university in the top 50 in the world, there are things that India needs, which UNSW is in a position to offer. And I think this higher education collaboration is really going to be one where you try and find out design solutions to problems. And countries like India, countries across the board, actually, developing countries, face significant development challenges. And
You're absolutely
if
right.
we can, yeah, if we can use the stock of knowledge to be able to improve lives, to transform lives, to create a just society, I think that's the purpose of education.
Well, since you talk about, as you have written extensively on higher education, so am I. I've written many columns in Economic Times and other newspapers in India. What challenges
I've
do
had the
you
great
think?
honor, I've had the great honor, Frank, of reading your articles, and I must commend you. They're so well thought through and so well written. Congratulations. Great honor
Well,
to read you.
thank you very much. And I do have some help because of my staff. Um, as President Obama said, that education will be the currency of the 21st century. It's a gift that keeps on giving. He also said that education frees the human mind from the shackles of ignorance. And President Obama happens to be a good friend. I traveled with him to India when he went there on the Republic Day parade. So my question to you, what area do you think that the India's education system needs to fix? And why is the politicians controlling some of the higher educational system?
Well, I mean, India's biggest, one of the grand challenges, if you like, that India faces is in education, whether it's primary education, secondary education, or higher education. And there are reports that say that only 5% of India's engineers are actually employable, which means that what you're doing is you have a significant demand supply mismatch, and you have institutions that are providing absolutely substandard education. Now, if you do not improve the quality of your education, your population is not going to be employable, which means
Right.
that you cannot take advantage of your demographic dividend. The demographic dividend will actually become a demographic disaster. And I think, therefore, it becomes absolutely critical that governments focus on higher education, primary and secondary education across the board if India is really going to find its place in the 21st century. Otherwise, there are going to be serious problems.
Well, but a couple of things that I wanted to have you shed some light on it. How do you go about increasing the public financing and enhancing the infrastructure and also putting emphasis on the vocational education, which lacks in India? Not everybody can go to IIT. They need some community colleges also where they can learn the trade and tools. So, as the manufacturing sector grows in India, that'll be an important aspect. Is can you shed some light on that? Why is it lacking there in India?
All right, so let's just start with vocational education and training because I mean, what you've touched on is really the big problem, and finding a panacea is not easy. But let's start with vocational education and training. Now, if you
Oh,
want to skill people, first have to
right,
anticipate demand, which means that you have to do forward planning. What kind of skills would be necessary 10, 15, 20 years from now? I mean, unless you do that, I mean, if my daughter or my son were going to college right now, I have to actually provide her with the skills that she or he would need 4 years later. But 4 years later, what's going to happen? The jobs have not yet been created. I had never heard words like app, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. These are not words I knew before. Smart transport, because those words didn't exist at that time. Today, they've
Correct.
become Bibles. But 4 years
Right.
later, all these words may undergo a dramatic change, which means that the purpose of education has to be to anticipate the future. And unless you're able to recraft teaching, your pedagogy, it's not going to work. And so when you have vocational education and training, India needs to ask itself 5 years later, 10 years later, what kind of skills do I need? And that's the kind of skill that you have to inculcate in your population. Second,
Very well said.
you have to also understand that we have social inhibitions. I mean, if our child decides to do a course in a vocational education and training polytechnic, we say, oh, he's not bright enough to get into university. So these are prejudices that we have. We have to be able to share with our people the actual challenge that we are facing, and that's the job of governance. I mean, and second, I would say that you have to have much, much greater private sector participation in education with a strong regulatory mechanism. Now, this I
Very well
think
said.
today is there's a great lack of clarity on this, which is why it's a challenge.
And one of the things that I also wanted to share with you, we need to uplift the minorities, their education, because that's very important, so that they can get out of the poverty. And the second, and also just minority and Dalit, and that's something the India needs to do that, and also make it affordable, accessible education for them. If they succeed, which is 200 million Muslims, and then you have a 200 million Dalit, the India succeed and the world succeeds.
No, I agree with you. I mean, let's take. I mean, you mentioned Dalits and you mentioned the minority
And
communities.
Muslims.
Let me take gender. Let me take gender. Today, if a woman in India decides to study engineering, we don't think it's the proper thing to do. We believe that women should study, uh, liberal arts. We don't think women
Right.
in engineering. Yet in my university, the University of New South Wales, the dean of engineering is a woman. An Indian
Correct.
woman called Veena Sahajwala is doing path-breaking research on waste management. The entire work on quantum computing is being done by a woman. So I think women in engineering, women and science, women and medicine, these are not no-nos. We have to change the way we think. And unless we do that, you can't have a 19th century mindset in order to be part of the 21st century.
Very well said, Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned a little bit about the Australia has become the newest educational destination for the Indian students. My question is why the Indian students are going? Do you think they're safer? Do you think they're more welcoming? And do you think it's more cost effective for them to go there rather than going to the United States? And the United States has a little bit of a problem in terms of the growing sentiment about the immigrants under this
I think
administration.
I think the preferred destinations were the US and the UK for decades. There's been some dramatic changes both in the US and the UK, which has caused uncertainties. And if you couple with this the fact that in terms of the exchange rate, it's much cheaper to study in Australia
Oh, I did
out
not know
of
that.
yeah, it's much cheaper to study in Australia. And look at it this way: out of the 33 universities that Australia has, seven of them are in the top 100, and five are in the top 50. So
Wow.
when the US and the UK ended up with this cloud of uncertainty, people
Hmm.
started looking at other markets because there is a strong push factor. Many of the Indian students will not get admission in university in India because there are limited seats, but they
Right.
need to be educated. So the push
Yes.
factor operates, and they have to be pushed out of India to study abroad. Then comes in the pull factor. If US and UK are not going to be able to pull the students, Australia is the preferred destination. So there's a great demand for Australian education because it's quality education. It's a great place to stay and live in. It's a multicultural society. My university has 56,000 students, of whom 21,000 are international students.
My
So, I mean, that's a
goodness.
completely different way of looking at the world.
Well, I did not know this thing. That's a wonderful thing to know. Maybe I'll welcome the opportunity to go to Australia and getting to know those people. That will be the important part of my journey and tell my story. Uh, and
I
and
think so.
and,
I think so. And
who
you
where
tell
we
the
came.
story very you tell the story
Thank,
well, and I think it's worth looking at Australian education, and you know what brand building is like. Uh,
yes,
it's easy to damage a brand. It's very difficult to build a brand. But once a brand is damaged, brand recovery takes a very long time. And currently, with the uncertainties with US and the UK, if Australia is discovered, as indeed it is being discovered, it might well become the preferred higher education destination for Indians.
you're a great ambassador to Australia, Indian ambassador to Australia. You've done a great job, and I hope people will listen to you and or welcome the Indian students to go to Australia and make it welcoming to them. I wanted to talk to you two things. Number one is you have been ambassador to Philippines. Do you think Philippines has become a destination and they're taking some of the IT jobs in from India to Philippines? And second thing, tell me a little bit about some of the books that you have written. As I understand, you're a story writer. You published two books, and I think the audience will be very interested to know a little bit about your books and why did you get into that. I wrote two books on myself, but they're not a storyteller. They're about America and how do we move America forward.
Well, I mean, with the Philippines, I mean, I'm a free market person. I believe in competition. And I think competition only makes the market grow and become better.
Yes,
I don't
yes,
think the Philippines information technology segment, the BPO segment, is a threat to what India does. And I believe there are areas of
I totally agree.
collaboration which are very, very possible. And my respect for the Filipinos is really something that I'm proud and I cherish. I've had terrific relationships there, and I saw what fantastic workers they can be, and more importantly, what fantastic companies they run and what great leaders they are. I don't see them as a threat at all. I believe there's enough and ample scope for collaboration because the problems we have are global problems. You have to find a global solution. And if the Philippines provides the solution, so be it. You need to solve the problem. And
Very well said.
by all, they are solving a lot of problems. And so I welcome collaboration there. And we have a very large number of Indian IT companies which are based in the Philippines, which work with Philippines workers and technicians and IT specialists. And well, the Indian companies are doing well. And so, I mean, that would be my take on the Philippines per se. And what was the second question? Pardon me.
Second question about your storyteller. You wrote two books. Tell us a
I,
little bit about your books. The audience would love to hear why did you, an ambassador writing the books, and and what was your objective, or your mission, what your goals were, and what were you trying to accomplish with those two books that you wrote?
so, I mean, I started. I was lucky, and I think my first book came out many years ago. I have about 16 books to my credit right now.
Oh
Uh,
God.
so, most of them are edited books, but I also have a number of other books. I during my service career, naturally, the rules and regulations did not allow me to write on foreign and security policy, so I stayed away from those two subject areas. And most recently, I wrote a couple of books which are fiction titles. Written a number of books on India. So yeah, I mean, right now I'm working on two books simultaneously.
What are those
One
two
is a
books, Mr. Ambassador? What are those two
well,
books you're
one is
writing now?
yeah. So one is fiction. It's called. It's basically. I believe that all of us have an inside and an outside to ourselves. So there
Yes.
are two cells that we actually try to navigate, and in our relationship with other people, sometimes we let them see our inside, but very often we let them see only the outside. and the two need not necessarily match. So, so the title of the book is A Quiet Noise. And
Wow.
basically what I'm trying to explore is this dilemma that we all grapple with in actually trying to marry, if you like, the inside and the outside. And the second book that I'm working on is on India-Australia relations. And yeah, so these are the two current projects. The one that I know that I will be able to put together by next year in terms of a broad-based draft would be on the new diplomacy. So I believe the challenges that diplomats across the globe will face is the new diplomacy that is very quickly coming upon them. And if you see it as a threat, there's going to be a problem. If you see it as an opportunity, then yeah, global relations can be shifted. I mean, today, for example, whether it's the former President Obama or the current President Trump, uh, would talk directly with the Indian Prime Minister. And if they do that, what is the role of the diplomat? Because earlier years, it was the diplomat who actually calibrated and put together the mechanism for the conversation. Now the
Correct.
conversation takes place sometimes behind closed doors without the diplomats being around. So people are connecting directly. That is the shift in strategic relations that's taking
Very well said.
place.
Well, I wanted to express my deep gratitude to you on these conversations, and thank you very much for all you have done and you continue to do. And good luck to you in your book as you undertake this new journey yourself. I know you
Thank you
have
very
been
much.
there before. So, this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.